Welcome back. We're discussing today the question of free speech in our own organization, but also in wider society. We've got with us Kit Klarenberg from the Grayzone and Winstanley from the Electronic Intifada. Craig Murray was also supposed to be here, but he hasn't quite managed it. He might join us later. Thank you both for joining. I'm going to start with Asa, please, if I could. Asa, this Labour Party conference has started quite symbolically with Palestine Action supporters being arrested, but also we've had a motion agreed at the conference floor calling Israel as committing a genocide. Can you see, how do you locate this tension over Palestine in the fight over free speech?
Well, I mean, it's a sign that Keir Starmer has failed to completely purge the Labour Party from any elements of solidarity with Palestine, as he aimed to do at the beginning of his tenure 5 years ago. He fairly successfully purged it, has to be said. But it shows just the levels of unpopularity around the world that Israel has reached. It's reached new bottoms of popularity around the world, and it shows that people are outraged, and that outrage is going to continue, and it's not something that they're going to be able to completely keep a lid on. But I mean, it does have to be said that it's the Labour Party, even at the height of its sort of democratic interruption when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, even then the motions at conference were purely symbolic, and they had no actual effects on the actual policies of the Labour Party, let alone the Labour government that we now have in place. So I think that although it's a positive sign, it's not going to make any material difference to the government's policies, unfortunately.
No, that's a long tradition, isn't it? Ignoring Labour Party conference resolutions going forward, but it's a symbolic victory of sorts. I think it sent out a particular message. Asa, you were quite outspoken when it came to the anti-Semitism smear campaign in the Labour Party. Where do you locate this particular moment, which I think it could have gone either way, couldn't it? I mean, Corbyn reacted in a particular way to it that some argue opened the doors for redefining what anti-Semitism is and put us in the position that we are today. Where do you locate this?
Well, I mean, the effects of the anti-Semitism hoax in the Labour Party were certainly long-lasting, and there's no doubt that the response of the left-wing Labour leadership to it, the inadequate response, we could say, to be the most kind, has had effects that are still ongoing now. I mean, I wrote about it in my book, Weaponizing Anti-Semitism, the final chapter especially. It's not a polemic in that sense that of just sort of criticizing Corbyn for the sake of it, but the critique is kind of implicit in the sense that it just shows that the problems with the left-wing Labour leadership's response to the anti-Semitism hoax was essentially to indulge it to a certain extent, was to kick people out of the Labour Party, to allow people to be expelled, and to increase the number of expulsions that actually happened under Corbyn's leadership. And, this is still an unresolved problem. This is still an unresolved issue with the founding of the new party, the Your Party initiative. What we were told at the beginning that it was going to be a co-leadership between Zara Sultan, a leading the co-founding of a new party between Zara Sultan and Jeremy Corbyn. And then there's been all this back and forth and all this internal controversy and so forth. And the two co-leaders of the founding taking different positions on the issue of Zionism. Zara Sultana coming out and saying very strongly that she's an anti-Zionist, and and saying that there was mistakes made under the Corbyn leadership, although sort of falling short of criticising Jeremy Corbyn himself personally. And Jeremy Corbyn then taking a very sort of defensive posture in response to that, saying, well, essentially saying that she shouldn't have said anything, which I thought was incredibly harsh and kind of tone deaf, really. And then refusing to say whether or not he's an anti-Zionist. I mean, look, my take on that personally is I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's a Zionist. But, it's an unresolved question of, if that's the case, then why can't he just say it openly? So it's not just a question of recent history, it's a question of where are things going now.
I suspect he's trying to play clever politics and not putting anybody off. But
yeah, well, that didn't work for him when he was leading the Labour Party, did it? Right?
Absolutely not, no. Kit, can I bring you in now? Kit Klarenberg from the Grayzone. Where do you see the biggest threats to free speech? I mean, there's Palestine, but does it go further than that?
Well, I mean, I think it must be said that while it's been nice to see like Zara Sultana coming out swinging on and with some ferocity on the Gaza genocide and openly declaring herself to be an anti-Zionist, she has been rather disappointing on quite a lot of other issues, which the left more widely has not had the best track record on. So she was cheering the fall of Assad in Syria at the end of last year. And then I think it was like 24 hours later, she was complaining about how Israel was now attacking Syria and seizing its territory. And while the Syrian authorities, the Western-backed HTS government, sat back and did nothing while massacring ethnic and religious minorities, which is exactly what people like Asa and myself were saying would happen if Assad fell for a decade. I think that the left's also been like pretty bad on Ukraine. There has been, I mean, in the US, there has been a greater diversity of opinion or on the proxy war, although a lot of that's sadly been on the right. There has been almost total unanimity on the necessity of arming Ukraine, of keeping this grinding on unsustainable human, material, and the economic cost. And a lot of people have fallen for the flagrantly ludicrous narrative that this is plucky Ukraine fighting to defend European values against like kind of hit the Nazis 2.0. I mean, it was my own work challenging that narrative that landed me in a counter-terror detention for 6 hours the last time I flew to the UK. These are all very sensitive issues for the British state due to the British state's direct involvement in the overthrow of Assad, the Gaza genocide, the Ukraine proxy war. They're not just complicit. They're not just assisting these things. They are directly involved in making them happen and facilitating them. My dear friend Alex Mackay, with whom I host the Decline and Fall podcast, shameless plug, I'm afraid, sorry. He has an excellent analogy, which is, in British media terms, it's not like Plato's cave where you're watching these fantastical shadows, cast on a wall. You're staring at the inside of a blindfold. Like, I mean, even, typically, radical publications like the Morning Star took the standard establishment line on Syria and Ukraine. They did so because they were quite clearly worried about the potential ostracism, backlash, or maybe even state level consequences for not towing that line. I think that there needs to be a wider discussion about why these lapses in judgment keep happening. Why is it that when the latest Western-sponsored coup occurs, is there a large chorus of people saying, "Well, this time it's organic"? Why, when the West is intervening in some country to get rid of a meddlesome leader in order to get their hands on resources, is this time it's a humanitarian intervention launched for with the best of intention? Like, people keep falling for this stuff, despite very clear recent historical precedents that would very clearly suggest that this is not the case, and what we are being told about what is happening and why isn't true. And it is, yes, indeed, why people like Asa and myself end up in the crosshairs of the national security state, because we are fracturing that matrix. But the point isn't that people should be scared into being into silence or going along with the established narrative of the day. We need more people trying to puncture that matrix, and it is very heartening to see that despite the concerted mass purge of Palestine solidarity within Labour, which has been openly admitted by the Guardian now, that McSweeney and his shadowy cronies were on a mission to just completely obliterate Corbyn's support base within the party, within the media. They waged this devastatingly effective campaign to cripple the Canary, which was previously very pro-Corbyn. There shouldn't be a deterrent. It should be an encouraging, motivating factor, I think.
Yeah. Well, interesting points. I mean, I quite agree that much of the left seems to be thinking it has to support either, Russia or Ukraine. It has to support either or, and I think there is definitely a space for an independent media, an independent left seeing through it and exposing all sides. We don't have to take sides between different butchers, though. I mean, you are locating the attacks on free speech, I think quite rightly, on imperialism's drive to war. Do you see a danger that this is part of the push against China, part of the push against Russia, silencing voices that are critical of what imperialism is doing?
Well, I mean, absolutely, and it's like, I mean, it should never be forgotten that the mainstream media is driven entirely by narratives, and these are narratives cooked up in the Foreign Office and Downing Street and the headquarters of MI6 and MI5, and therefore any information which is contrary to this narrative needs to be ignored, and anyone mentioning this stuff needs to be one way or another neutralized. Britain is a core centre of censorship. It is seeking to export its methods of media control, such as the DSMA committee, which issues D notices that impact hugely what doesn't get reported on in matters of national security, which is a very broad topic indeed, and could encompass, say, British companies engaged in corrupt activities in the global south. It has specifically sought to place itself as a centre of quote unquote counter disinformation. I have reported on leaked British intelligence documents related to a supposed anti-disinformation operation in Eastern and Central Europe, in which there is a very illuminating passage, which is one of the key barriers to successfully countering Russian disinformation. It is often factually true. So I mean, I think that we are, it's quite clear that we are being prepared for a variety of conflicts. Although, I mean, if there is a silver lining in this, it's that that modern Britain does not have the capabilities or even the will to fight any of this stuff. There was a very interesting King's College study. I think it was from at the start of last year. It obviously didn't get any media coverage, but it analysed the reporting in mainstream British outlets on China, and it found that something like 75% of the reporting was negative. Even neutral stories would try and crowbar in some reference to the non-existent Uyghur genocide or, crackdowns on free speech in Hong Kong. just for the sake of balance, it does have a huge effect not only on public policy debates but also public perceptions and actions. We see this in the lead up to the Ukraine war, and this is no accident. There was this relentless demonization of Russia. Britain was at the forefront of that via Integrity Initiative, which is this British intelligence black propaganda unit, which was also targeting Jeremy Corbyn, interestingly, amongst other anti-war, pro-Palestine figures. So I do think all of this ties in, and it's getting to the point now where the sweeping dragnet that was created by the under counter-terrorism laws almost a quarter of a century ago now, around the time of 9/11, that's now being turned on like the entire population. We are seeing videos emerge of people getting a knock on the door from the police saying your child may have viewed extremist content and therefore we want to seize their device and stuff. I think Asa can testify very viscerally to his own experiences of getting raided completely illegally. It does seem that the British state is completely off leash and is completely unconcerned about the consequences legally. The negative PR that all of these activities create. When I got stopped and detained in May 2023, part of me thought that the extremely negative backlash, even by mainstream organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists and the mainstream media, or elements thereof, might serve as a deterrent to the British state doing this again. But no, they seem to have. Seems to have been a test run. Now it's almost monthly that people are, independent campaigners, researchers, journalists, dissident figures are being stopped and detained and having their electronic devices seized upon entry in the UK. Craig Murray, who sadly isn't with us currently. Steve Sweeney, veteran journalist. He returned to the UK and had all of his devices taken and was grilled intensively about his political opinions. Mere days ago, George Galloway and his wife were detained entering Gatwick Airport. George Galloway is someone with 1 million Twitter followers. He's been elected 7 times as an MP, spent decades in Parliament, a very prominent public figure. It's no deterrent at all. They don't seem remotely concerned about any backlash over this, but I actually think that they should, because normies, like relatively politically disconnected individuals, or people who absolutely aren't involved in activism and even still rely on the mainstream media for information, they are seeing this happen and asking, what the hell is going on? Why are 80-year-old women getting arrested violently for wearing T-shirts saying I support Palestine action?
Absolutely. It's a redefinition of terrorism, just like we've seen a redefinition of anti-Semitism to mean something entirely different. Asa, back to you then. Kit just mentioned you had your house raided, etc. What is the outcome of this? And are you supported, for example, by NUJ? How is that going? What do you want to see? What kind of support do you want to see?
Yeah, I was supported by the NUJ, thankfully, which was not a given that would happen, considering that they haven't admitted Craig Murray to be a member, which they should. But they did, thankfully, they did support me. They put out certainly the membership supported me, and the leadership as well put out some quite good statements supporting me. And the result was that earlier this year we won in the Old Bailey, and my device, the court ordered the police to give my devices back. So that's good news. We got the devices back. You always assume these things have been compromised, but nonetheless, it was an important legal ruling because it means that the police illegally raided me, as Kit said, like that this was an illegal raid on my home, that it was done without any actual legal justification to do so, and so it meant that anything that they have obtained for my devices is done so illegally, and they can't then theoretically can't use that in against any of my sources. I mean, that was the whole thing really, that we wanted support from the NUJ to do, which we did get, was to to fight them, to provide a degree of protection for my sources. So that was successful. And so that's good. We got the devices back, but nonetheless, the police, last we heard from the police, they say that the criminal investigation into me, which was predicated, ostensibly was supposed to be the reason for the raid in the first place, into my tweets, is still ongoing as far as we know. Although they haven't asked me since the court ruled that what they did was illegal, they haven't asked me to come in for an interview. So we're waiting for them to drop that. My lawyers are trying to get them to drop that investigation, but ostensibly it's still ongoing, although it doesn't seem to be active. But this is what they do, right? This is what they do with activists as well. They keep these investigations kind of hanging over your head to kind of have a chilling effect into the kind of investigations that you do as a journalist. And so that was the outcome there. So we've had some good response, some good support there, and I think it is because people like Kit were detained before me, and there was a kind of progressive amount of outrage that happens, and it's like there's the British state doesn't seem to be deterred, but like Kit said, they should be, because there's a real sense, especially on the issue of Palestine and the genocide in Gaza, in which, and this is not unique to Britain, but Britain is certainly at the forefront of it, along with Germany and a couple of other states. There's a real sense in which Western states are dismantling any vestiges they have of democracy or independent judiciary within their societies, purely to protect the genocidal entity, which is, killing people every day in Gaza. And that's what we're seeing.
The attack on the right to have a jury, hearing your case, that's certainly part of that as well. Kit, I was going to look at you briefly at a slightly different aspect, and that is, when you hear about the fight for free speech, almost the loudest voices are coming from the right. It seems like the right has sort of taken that campaign for free speech. It's totally dishonest, of course. How do you identify that campaign?
Well, yeah, I think that people have been warning about the right's monopolization of issues like free speech for a very, very long time. And I think that the right's monopolization of all manner of other things, including investigations into, FBI, police, MI5, MI6, CIA wrongdoing, is increasingly becoming the preserve of the right as well. To give you like a very recent example, Charlie Kirk, someone who was not possessed of opinions remotely reflective of my own, and certainly not someone I would say that I would want to necessarily have a pint with. Like his assassination on September 10th. It absolutely reeks. It is so suspicious what happened. The left, with the notable exception of the mighty Council of State Media run by Ricky Hale, has been completely silent on this. And the reason, on top of the fact that I think that it has typically been the left's role to act as a watchdog of the forces of repression, which I've listed, and not to be like on their side. Moreover, the ultimate victims of the all but inevitable crackdown that Charlie Kirk's murder will be exploited to justify will be the left themselves. And we've just the Trump administration has just issued a national security memorandum calling for the deployment of the National Guard in most major American cities, and talking about the threat of left-wing extremists and Marxists, and specifically citing Charlie Kirk's assassination as an example of why there needs to be, why security and intelligence services need more powers, why they need more money, why there need to be more police, more soldiers on the street, etc. I can very easily foresee something similar happening in the UK, and with digital IDs. They are. This is something that Starmer is now very aggressively pushing out of nowhere. Mainstream journalists are universally supportive of this, and are indeed rubbishing concerns about this. There is a component of the left that is concerned about this, but actually, again, it's more right-wing figures who are raising concerns about this, which is not good. It's really not good, because you are handing control of the narrative over to people who, in many cases, have a malign agenda. They're not actually concerned about free speech. They're not actually concerned about civil liberties. They're not actually concerned about abuses of power. They're only concerned about these things when they affect them. And there's that, the classic, well, what would you do if the devil turns round on you? There does seem to be quite a bit of support, actually, in at least in the mainstream, across mainstream left-wing figures, for all sorts of repressive, censorious measures. Again, this is bad. It needs to be counteracted. We can't let these issues be monopolized and become the sole preserve of people who are diametrically opposed to us, and want to undermine us. And within that as well, I do think that this is something that's been deliberately stoked, is a high degree of polarization, where somehow it's unbecoming or verboten to be in any way associated with people whose opinions deviate from your own in any way, which is very bizarre. I am struck by how often I hear people use the caveat when discussing the work or the analysis or statements of a public figure, and they're very quick to say, oh, well, I don't agree with everything this person says, but, and it's like, well, I mean, can you think of a single person with whom you agree about everything? Like, without any disagreement whatsoever. This is a very modern coinage, and it's become completely mainstream. I think that there are a lot of people who seem to be, not for one reason or another, not willing to speak up about these issues, precisely because they've been monopolized by the right. But in the process of doing so, you are deepening that monopoly by definition.
Asa, back to you quickly for the end. I mean, you were a member of the Labour Party, obviously. I'm not sure if you've joined your party, but in this context, I think that's a really important point. We've seen in the Labour Party how, free speech was abused by those above, and the left accepted much of that. There was, can't platform so-and-so because he's an anti-Semite. She said something anti-Semitic. Have we learned any lessons from that when it comes to your party and having a culture of discussion and debate?
Yes and no. I mean, no, I'm not a member of your party. And I quit the Labour Party, of course, before while I was being investigated on purely farcical reasons, like a lot of other people. I mean, I think people have learned lessons, but people at the top don't seem to have learned lessons, and that unfortunately seems to be the case, for this kind of culture. of no platforming, which I don't agree with. I mean, I think that I think what Kit said really resonated. You know, I was reminded of Liz Truss, right? Again, someone who I despise, frankly, but I did not cheer when she was deposed by the City of London because you know you'd have to, as Prime Minister, when she was if you remember, when she was very briefly Prime Minister in 2022, she was essentially deposed by the City of London, right? In it kind of a coup in a way. And so I didn't cheer for that because, the same techniques can absolutely be used for the left as well. So we shouldn't be naive to cheer on these things. And I think that it, I've been warning that the same things that were used against Jeremy Corbyn when he was the leader of the Labour Party, specifically the anti-Semitism hoax, will be used again against your party, no matter who's the leader. Or co-leaders, or however it pans out, right? It will be used again. The same specific strategy of an anti-Semitism hoax will be used again. And I've received some pushback on that from some comrades who say, well, people have learned their lesson from that, and they're not going to buy into it. But let me tell you, right? I mean, having studied this for years and having literally written the book about it, people as a mass of people, the mass of the Labour Party members who have now been expelled or pushed out of Labour for the most part, and a lot of them are either joining your party or considering joining your party. Those people never ever bought it as a mass of people. Polling showed that time and time again. Even after 4 years of rampant, and I write about this in my book, Weaponizing Anti-Semitism. After 4 years of this rampant hoax, right? The Labour Party members never believed it. The polling at the end showed that they never believed it. And it was like 75%, even after 4 years of this constant mainstream media propaganda saying, well, Jeremy Corbyn's either an anti-Semite. That's what it was by the end. Obviously, Margaret Hodge was just openly saying Corbyn was an anti-Semite. Or at the beginning, it was, well, he doesn't have a handle. He's not doing enough against the anti-Semitism, blah, 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 all this nonsense. 4 years of that, people still didn't buy it. People never bought it. The problem wasn't the Labour Party membership. I actually, at the beginning, I was afraid that people would believe it and they would start to be convinced by this nonsense, but they never really did, by and large. It was always a minority of people who bought into that. The problem was people in influential positions, Jeremy Corbyn himself, and people around him who got intimidated by it, or for whatever reasons, whatever political calculations they made, decided that, well, okay, Ken Livingstone, we don't like him anyway. Maybe there was, certain grudges on the left, and there were against Ken Livingstone. So we're just going to suspend him. We're just going to forget everything he did as a pioneer for anti-racism, for example, or for LGBT rights in the days when it was really unpopular to do so. We're going to forget all of that and we'll just suspend him and just basically push him out in this really grubby way, backroom deal that they did. We're just going to forget all that. And that has a really corrosive effect when especially when you're trying to build a democratic mass movement of people. If Ken Livingstone can be thrown to the wolves, then anybody can. So where's the solidarity? And so it's a yes and a no. I mean, I think people have learned the lessons, but then the masses were never convinced by it anyway. The big question is whether people at the top are going to learn those lessons, and it seems to me that that's the stakes at the top of the dispute in your party.
I think you're spot on there, and there are other areas I think where we'll be tested soon in terms of do you allow discussion, or do you say one of these views is beyond the pale, etc. That's going to be a very dangerous way to go down. So how do we turn this around? What can we do in terms of fighting for the right to free speech? What are the answers? I mean, you're both involved in independent media. What else? How else can we do it? And where do you see, for example, the strategy of Palestine action going? Do you think that's going to be successful? Starting with you, Kit.
Well, I mean, I think that as bleak as things can seem, with mass arrests and people getting harassed by the police for holding cardboard signs expressing solidarity with Palestine, and yes, the introduction of digital ID, which seems all but inevitable at this stage. I mean, we must never forget that Palestine action, contrary to the lies peddled by the Home Office that they were supported by Iran, this was an independent volunteer group comprising people of every age, sex, socioeconomic background. Like average people coming together and risking that, putting themselves at significant risk to support a cause that they really believed in, and they were devastatingly successful. That they were on the verge of getting Elbit shut down in the UK, hence the completely insane and draconian prescription of the group as a terrorist entity on a par with Al Qaeda, which, of course, British authorities have no compunction about meeting with in person when they like the Al Qaeda representatives in question, like Al Yulani, the presumptive head of Syria. But I mean, I think that should serve as some kind of positive motivating factor. Actually, power is a lot less powerful than people think. Collectively and even individually, people have more power than they know. The state is on the run, and we see this, all over Europe. Last year, again, his politics are not my own, and I personally wouldn't vote for him in a million years. But Kalin Georgescu, who was this outsider figure, was on the verge of winning Romania's presidential election. They just overturned the result. We've just had an election in Moldova where there was absolutely blatant rigging and all sorts of skullduggery to skew the results and ensure that the kind of pro-Western puppet Maya Sandu and her deeply corrupt government, which is effectively just a front, they're just the faces of a EU-US colony, barely scraped into power despite undertaking all of these illiberal, autocratic, anti-democratic measures to skew the results in her favor. People can see, again, average people can see with their own eyes, and that the supposed democracies that they live in, when they've been relentlessly bombarded with propaganda about how, you have free speech, you have freedoms and rights that are not extended to people who live in awful, smelly dictatorships like Russia and China. They're seeing how much of a fraud and a facade this is. I commented on this at the time. There was a very interesting BBC report on the Romanian coup, in which there was a Romanian NATO apparatchik interviewed who said, "Well, we dodged a bullet, but at most we bought ourselves some just a bit more time, because there are real problems here that mainstream politics is not addressing." So, I think we've reached a point in the Western world where governments they're not representative of the people they claim to govern. They have, little or no legitimacy with average people. We see this with Starmer, elected with much fanfare, this kind of record high majority in Parliament. He's now the most unpopular Prime Minister in British history, having replaced the most unpopular British Prime Minister in history in the form of Rishi Sunak. This is a fundamentally unsustainable state of affairs. And yes, there will probably be greater crackdowns. There will be, desperate lashing out and flailing by power structures in order to try and maintain their positions. But really, they're on the run. I mean, recently, the British government has recognised Palestine. It's a pretty empty, meaningless gesture, but still, the mere fact that they did this, they didn't do this for no reason or out of the goodness of their hearts. They did so because of immense public pressure and fear of public opinion. So it's it's a pity we have to live through the short-term repression, which is going to all power structures when they're on their way out become hyper brutal and savage in hitherto uncharted ways. But it's a sign of desperation and weakness, not strength.
Absolutely.
And I do think that there is a better future lies ahead. There is that. Rather famous Xi Jinping meme, which is, do nothing, win. Well, I'm not suggesting that people do nothing, but I am suggesting that people don't allow themselves to fall into the traps that the powers that be lay, the anti-Semitism psyop in Labour being one of them. A lot of average people outside the Labour Party did fall for that. I think that people outside Labour are a lot wiser to it now. And quite clearly we have seen the strategy that was advocated at the time, which is, say sorry and move on. Just gives the Israelis and gives the security services and gives the enemies of progress more ammunition. Give them an inch and they take a mile. Yeah. So it's like really, I think that we need to be robust. We need to not bend or compromise. And say very, very clearly what we believe in and our willingness to what we're willing to do to support and further those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry. I have to cut us down up now. Sorry, we're coming to the end now. This is a really interesting discussion. Clearly, I entirely agree with you. Capitalism is on its way out, but we're not quite there to take over yet. That is our problem. We need to get our own house in order. We need to fight for free speech, very much a part of that principled opposition to capitalism and building up our own forces. And what you're doing very much, both of you, with your independent media and obviously the show as well, and hopefully we can continue this in the future. Thank you very much, Asa. Thank you, Kit. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless you.